Suffering is one of those issues that all of us are going to face at some point or another. Most of us have already faced in life by this point. And the book of Job is one of the books that I think gives us the most helpful way to navigate suffering, or at least it's been helpful for me. Because in my experience, what helps me when I'm suffering is not someone telling me how to suffer well, right? It's not someone giving me the 5 keys to a better life or the 3 ways to find joy in this experience. What helps me when I'm suffering is when people will sit with me in the ashes like Job's friends initially did, and then when I reorient and refocus my life on the God of the universe. And that's difficult to do during suffering, and I think the book of Job teaches us that at least. Because we find in the book of Job something that we find all the way over in the New Testament. In John 9, Jesus and his disciples are walking along and they see this blind man. And his disciples say, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And now Jesus goes on to say, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him." And now, one can understand the disciples' question here, right? You see a blind person, you think, oh, he must have done something wrong. Because the disciples and Job's friends saw suffering through a theological construct that said, if you're suffering, you must have sinned. All sin results from suffering. And in my classes, when I've taught the book of Job or taught about suffering, unjust suffering, there's inevitably someone who will say something to the effect of, good things or bad things don't happen to good people because there are no good people. Now, I don't know who originally said that. I'm sure it's someone famous who's way smarter than me. But I do know that that pushes up against what we find in the book of Job and what Jesus says here in Luke, who says it's not, this man wasn't born blind because of his suffering, because of his sin. And Job wasn't suffering because of his unrighteousness, but it was that God's glory might be displayed. And as we go on through the book of Job, through these 42 chapters of very dense Hebrew poetry, we see Job's friends saying over and over, like, "Job, just repent, just repent." And Job over and over saying, "I have nothing to repent about. I'm innocent. I don't know why I'm suffering so much." And they're both looking at this issue of suffering from this idea of retribution theology and this idea that the personal sin is the cause of all suffering. Now, what the Lord does in the last few chapters of this book is he comes in his awesome display of majesty and might and asks Job this series of questions over and over. Where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did that? Where were you when I did this? And all of these questions designed to demonstrate to Job that he does not know anything, right? It's designed to bring humility to Job and designed to demonstrate that God is sovereign and God is mysterious. And so I think that is the most helpful thing that the book of Job teaches us about suffering. Not that everything happens for a purpose, even though ultimately, right, it does, God is sovereign. God is in control. But what the book of Job teaches us that's most helpful about suffering is that God is sovereign. And there is mystery in this life and in this world, and there are things that we will never really understand or grasp. But we can trust in the good God who made us. And so that's not going to take away the suffering, right? Job still had the boils on his body. He still had to grieve the death of his children and the loss of everything he'd worked his whole life for. And yet at the end of the book, what seems to be enough is that he saw the Lord. He ends one of Job's last statements here. His last statement is, "I know that you can do anything and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wondrous for me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. When I question, you will inform me. I had heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I reject my words and am sorry for them. I am dust and ashes." So this final poem in the book of Job is the key I think, to understanding what Job has to say about suffering. Namely, that trust the Lord. In the midst of suffering, we trust God, we trust his sovereignty, and we trust his goodness, even though we do not and cannot understand his ways and what may be going on in our lives.